Now, more evidence today that our power system is falling apart. This is appalling stuff. Last week it was New South Wales running so short of electricity that people were told, don't turn on your dishwashers, don't turn on your washing machines. Today, it's the energy market operator saying, oh dear, we need to be given emergency power so that we can switch off solar in every state when necessary, because there's just so much of it in the middle of sunny days that the whole system could collapse. Now, this is where the global warming dream of the Albanese government meets engineering and explodes. The problem this time is that we've now got more than 4 million rooftop solar systems, which sounds like the green dream, but solar and wind is actually unstable. It flickers, it can go completely, you always need stability and backup for those two problems. And both of those things usually come from coal and gas plants, ticking away in the background, ready to take over, stabilising the system. But they can't stay ticking there, stabilising the system, if there's so much solar and wind power that they have to be switched off completely. Too much solar power, who would have thought? Engineers, obviously, they've been warning about this for years, but politicians and activists, they were deaf. And all this, of course, is on top of even more signs that the supposed transition from coal power to renewables is turning out to be a disaster. The 3 biggest electricity transmission lines we're building to link all this green energy, they've blown out to double the cost, at least $16 billion. And South Australia is now so short of reliable electricity, having so much wind power, that it wants to take its old diesel power electricity generators out of mothballs urgently to keep on the lights. How could it have gone so wrong? Joining me is Dr. Adi Patterson, former Chief Executive of the Australian Nuclear Science and Technology Organisation, running our only nuclear power plant too, and now Chairman of Nuclear for Australia. Dr. Patterson, always great to see you. Look, we keep getting told by our politicians we need to go solar, and now we're told, hey, there's actually too much of this stuff. What exactly is the problem? Can you explain this to the layman?
Well, certainly in South Australia, there's too much. So they've overbuilt solar so they can be sure that it deals with the peaks. And then when the wind is blowing as well, there's too much solar and wind together, and that puts a huge penalty into the system. And then if the wind drops in the evening and the sun goes down, which it tends to do at night, suddenly you've got no power. So you have these massive swings in the amount of power. And so typically they use gas plants at the moment, but now they want to bring out some of the other old plants to stabilize that, to make sure that they can keep the lights on. Now, they've been warned about this. I've written about this quite extensively. I've spoken about it. But the underlying issue, the fundamental underlying issue, is that you cannot build a big renewables grid of the type that is planned by AEMO. AEMO is a cult. It does not follow the laws of physics and the principles of engineering. And it has kind of made up a grid that it believes can work that doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. If you add to that the snowy hydro battery, which is really struggling and is expensive and taking too long, the obvious thing to do is to lift the ban on nuclear. But the underlying fundamental issue is that low quality electricity also drives away business because they cannot have it when they need it. It's not always on, and sometimes you actually need it to be very, very pure, 3,000 RPM electricity. Now, all of these solar panels on the roof and all the wind turbines are DC devices, direct current, and they make up the electricity with digital equipment on the fence. That digital equipment is starting to fall over. It gets old in 10 to 15 years. And so more and more, we are building facilities that make bad electricity. And today, AEMO has announced that it wants synchronous condensers. Now, in my language, that's using DC electricity, which is intermittent, to turn really, really big machines at 3,000 RPM to pretend you're making proper electricity. When every coal plant or every nuclear plant or every gas plant will give you that inertia for free, that clean, pure 50 hertz electricity. So we're gradually destroying the system that works. We're building a system that has never worked anywhere else, and we're doing it under the direction, I'm not going to say leadership, but under the direction of a cult at AEMO. So it's terrible in 3 ways: bad electricity, bad planning, and a terrible outcome.
So there are actually two problems when we talk about stabilising the system. One is to actually have a very constant, as you say, that the RPM measure, very constant stream of electricity. There's not going wobble, wobble, wobble with every passing cloud. And the other one is to simply have enough power when there's none at all to, kick in. So there are two ways to stabilise it, and these two systems don't do it, or at least not without a huge extra cost in building a new form of inertia. It's like a carousel. You push it, and it's very hard to stop. And that's the idea.
You can't stop
but listen, what does that then tell you? I'm just wondering what this tells you about the government planning
thing it
to
tells
build
me is that
6
AEMO
times more what we've got. 3 times more, sorry, the large-scale wind and solar that we have already, to build 3 times more in just 6 years.
Yep, and double the size of the grid in 15. So the grid is 40% of the cost of the electricity that comes into our homes, but we're going to double the size of the grid for the same amount of electrons. The laws of economics have been thrown out of the window in order to satisfy the planning of the so-called system plan ISP of AEMO, which is a work of fiction. I mean, Joseph Conrad would be proud of it, or some other author from the 18th century. But we are trying to live in this century where 40 countries, democratic countries around the world, are moving to nuclear. And we, as an apparently democratic country, have a ban. You cannot do the plan. We know already. The engineering literature that is peer-reviewed says it is at least 50% more expensive and possibly 400% more expensive. We know this already. We are planning to fail expensively over the next 15 years.
Dr. Patterson, this is it's just disgraceful. It really is. Like you say, it's a cult. Dr. Eddie Patterson, thank you so much for trying to shine some light on this nonsense.